So No Man's Sky was probably one of the most controversial and one of the most disappointing games in 2016. It did not deliver. Well, recently, on the 24th of July, there has been a massive update to this game, which is being coined No Man's Sky Next. This update is absolutely huge and has added a ton of new features to the game. So the question I've got to ask today, guys, is No Man's Sky worth revisiting? So let's go through the actual updates themselves and some of the things that have been added to it, and I'm going to generally give my opinions on this update, my opinions on Sean Murray, and of course on Hello Games as a developer. So this update, which is quite incredible, is completely free for owners of the game on PC and PlayStation 4. It is now a buyable game on the Xbox One. I think it's priced at £40. But I wouldn't say this is like an entirely new game. It's not like a sequel, but it has added a lot of content. So let's go through some of the new additions in No Man's Sky Next. The first and probably the biggest update is the fact that we have finally gotten multiplayer. So this was one of the first things that gamers were clamoring for with No Man's Sky, and it was probably one of the biggest controversies because Sean Murray, in multiple interviews with journalists, was recorded as saying that you could, randomly meet people in the world, in the universe, and I think two YouTubers or two Twitch streamers proved that that was not the case. Well, in No Man's Sky Next, multiplayer is in. You can now actually play with up to 4 players, and you can play randomly with people in the world and go find people, but you can also play with your friends as well. There's no range limit on your party, so you can either stay together in the same galaxy, same area, or you can choose to split up and go to separate ends of the galaxy effectively. Everyone in that team will bring their own items and their own ships along, and you can play fully cooperative with your teammates, so you could either progress through the story together or embark on a number of multiplayer specific missions together as well. And another really cool feature is you can now share items across inventories, and that is really cool. Now, for those of you that have inner pirates in you, you can choose to attack fellow players. That is possible. However, it might be more trouble than it's actually worth, and obviously if you get taken down, you lose quite a lot. But multiplayer is in No Man's Sky finally, and for those of you that were sort of wanting to experience this game with friends, then that is obviously going to give you that option. Hello Games always said that the game was always meant to be kind of a lonely game, and that their vision of the game was being alone in a galaxy on a planet, and that the chance or likelihood of meeting somebody was very, very minuscule. So this is in complete contradiction to the original vision for the game. And you can, by jumping into a friend's party, I think you actually go through like a teleport, so you can effectively jump to the other side of the galaxy, which is convenient, if a little bit unrealistic. So the second biggest update to No Man's Sky is the fact that we now have a third-person perspective, and this can be not only for your playable character, but also for your ship as well. And probably this part is the biggest update that I really, really like. I love the fact that you can now choose to play either first person or third person. I think that's a really great decision. A lot of people really struggle with first person games. A lot of people struggle with motion sickness, with nausea, and so probably No Man's Sky was a game that they really couldn't play. They didn't have a choice to play it. Well, now because of the introduction of third person, they can go ahead and jump in and finally play this game. And I think it's really cool to be able to see your character in that world, and it gives you a sense of your place in that world, and the scale of it, and I really really like it. And then being able to see your ship as well is really really cool. Another nice addition that sort of supports this third person perspective is that you can now fully customize your player model, so that you can change the look of your character at pretty much at any time in the game. To do this, you go to a terminal, which is at most kind of bases and space stations, and you can fully customize your character from your race. I think there are 5 races that you can choose from, as well as your helmet, your suit, and specific individual parts of your suit as well. To support this as well, they've now introduced animations and emotes as well, so you can be a lot more expressive, and so that your character can look a lot more sort of unique and varied. And obviously this is all about supporting that whole multiplayer dynamic of the game, so that you can make your character your own and make them really interesting and really really different. So third person perspective, yeah, I like that as an addition. The next change is that bases, which are not new, but for building bases, it was always specific locations that you could sort of settle down and build these bases on. Well, now you can build bases pretty much anywhere, so you can build them up mountains, underwater, which for me is the coolest feature, and you can make these bases much bigger in scale. I think you can build with up to like 20,000 items. So for you Minecraft fans out there, you're going to probably really love this addition. What's really nice as well is any party member that's playing with you can actually add to your base and can add their own kind of elements to it, and they can also sort of explore your base and you know, you can sort of show it off to your friends online, which is really cool. So you can build bases on planets, but you can also build them on space stations as well, and on freighters, so you can make it kind of unique and your own sort of style and lay down some roots in your favorite planets. So that's really cool. The fourth sort of newest change, or not sort of addition, because they existed before, but now you can actually buy and build huge fleets. Now, freighters are not new. These have existed in the game, but they've been expanded massively. So now you can actually buy and build up to 60 frigates and freighters, and you can send these on real-time missions, which is really cool. And if you do this, you'll obviously be rewarded with things like units and resources as well. You can also call these fleets into battle to help you in combat, and each of sort of the frigates will have their own kind of style or strength. So some might be geared more towards combat, some more towards exploration, you know, trade, merchants, that kind of thing. So the whole idea of being able to sort of buy and build your own fleet, I mean, if you want to be a space pirate, it's kind of doable now in No Man's Sky, which is really cool. And obviously you can have big space battles and fly around in your ship, which you can now see in third person and experience that for yourself. So that's really cool. Space stations, of course, are still within the game, but now they have also been improved. Space stations before were kind of very isolated and were a little boring, you know, there wasn't much going on inside of them, but now actually space stations are quite lively, and they're sort of more like communal markets. So there will be AI characters on the space station, there'll be merchants that you can trade with, there'll be NPCs I think that you can interact with and get particular like multiplayer missions and particular things to do. So that's really cool. So yeah, nice new additions. There have been a few improvements made to the game and a few tweaks as well. So the UI has now been redone and it actually takes up less screen space. Again, that whole idea of immersing you in the game and the, sort of the aesthetic of it all and the world and everything. The terrain and environments on the planet are definitely improved and more varied and more interesting. We can just see this from the color palette of some of the planets. There are cave systems, there are storms, forests. We finally got to see actual forests and trees. People went crazy over these trees, which is hilarious. And the planets themselves look just more interesting and better. We actually now have ringed planets, which is really cool. The idea of flying through those rings, I would love if we got like big gas giants in the game as well, and I just think that would be really, really cool. There is just so much extra content in this game now. Than there used to be, and now apparently, according to Hello Games, there's 30 hours worth of main story campaign content as well as sort of missions, so there's a lot more to do, of course, as well as all the kind of grinding and crafting, obviously, in the Minecraft elements. Don't get me wrong, this is still very much a Minecraft-esque game. There is still a lot of grinding, but it's a lot more interesting and more varied to perhaps make the experience more enjoyable, especially if you're playing with your friends online. So Hello Games have also confirmed that they are going to continue to update the game, that this isn't the end, and that they will actually be having sort of weekly free updated content, including community events, which will give you exclusive rewards and customizable options. And what's really nice is the game will not feature any type of microtransactions, and all this future content will be free for owners of the game. So, I've got to say, all that content is quite impressive, and it's very clear that Hello Games have been incredibly busy over the 2 years since the initial release of the game. And I think, we've got to give Hello Games a little bit of credit here. Even I, looking at all this content, yeah, it looks interesting, and the game definitely looks better than it used to be. Whether or not I'll jump in and play this game again, I don't know. I'm still kind of on the fence on it, because I was kind of burnt by No Man's Sky, and particularly by the sort of misinformation and misdirection with all the marketing and advertising of the game back in 2016. I think it kind of soured the game for me. But I've got to say, I've traded the game in already, and I'm not going to buy it at full price. Maybe I would have another go if it was free to play, or if it was kind of reduced in price quite significantly. But I've got to say, it does interest me, and it definitely looks more enjoyable than it used to be. But right now I'm not in any rush to buy it, because there's just too many other games coming out that I want to play. But is it worth diving back into No Man's Sky? I think given all the content that's been released for it, absolutely, it looks more interesting. And if you've got friends that are playing it or are interested in playing it with you, it might be a good time to actually jump in. But I think at its base, at its core, it's still a very grindy game, and a Minecraft style game, and that for me is, I never really enjoyed those styles of game. So let's talk a little bit about sort of Sean Murray and Hello Games as well, and what my general opinion is on that studio, and also what we can learn from the lesson of No Man's Sky. So there was a recent article in The Guardian, which is a UK newspaper, where Sean Murray actually did an interview with them regarding No Man's Sky and the response to it, and the mistakes that Hello Games made, and the criticism and ridicule that game faced as well. Now, Sean Murray, after the initial backlash against the game, pretty much has gone on kind of a social media like blackout. Like, he's not done any interviews with journalists in pretty much 2 years. So this is the first time that he's kind of spoken to them about, obviously, the update. And the article's really, really interesting. If you haven't read it, I'll put a link in the description below for you guys to check it out, as well as a link to the trailer for you guys to watch as well. But it was really, really interesting to sort of read and to look at. And it kind of revealed a lot about like how Sean Murray felt about the game and what they've kind of learned from it. So, Sean did admit that perhaps they got some things wrong. And he did talk about, how the internet, unfortunately, does kind of reveal all the weaknesses in the game. So I'm going to quote directly from the actual article that he that it's written in. The internet is really good at knowing when somebody has made a mistake. It's not necessarily necessarily the best at determining the most appropriate response, but it's really good at knowing when somebody has messed something up. We definitely messed up a whole bunch of communication. I've never liked talking to the press. I didn't enjoy it when I had to do it, and when I did it, I was naive and overly excited about my game. There are a lot of things around launch that I regret or that I would do differently. Now, I think the fact that Murray's picking up on communication being the issue there is absolutely right. There was a lot of very poor communication during the marketing for this game, and there was a lot of miscommunication. I don't think it was necessarily the fact that Hello Games weren't communicating clearly enough. I think the issue that a lot of people had was just the blatant lie and misrepresentation of the game. You know, when Sean was promising, oh, we've got this and we've got this feature, and oh yeah, you can absolutely play with your friends, and then it turned out in the actual base game that these things were just not true. So I think the biggest issue is not the communication, it's more the blatant lies that were kind of told about the game, and I think that's what people had the biggest issue with when the game came out back in 2016. But at least the fact that he knows they communicated very poorly and that it was a mistake is good to see anyhow. So the next thing they talked about was how kind of people reacted to it, and I've got to say that, you know, the reaction to it, of course, a lot of people were disappointed, but there was a small section of the community that were really, really hateful and really took it too far. And Hello Games, you know, they got a lot of death threats, they got bomb threats, harassment, and, you know, the police had to be involved. And I just think, you know, that kind of behavior is really unacceptable. Yes, the game was disappointing, but to actually threaten someone is quite ridiculous. And Murray does talk about, you know, one experience, and I'll sort of mention that for you guys here. So he said basically, I remember getting a death threat about the fact that there were butterflies in our original trailer, and you could see them as you walk past them, but there weren't any butterflies in the launch game. I remember thinking to myself, maybe when you're sending a death threat about butterflies in a game, you might be the bad guy. So I think the death threats that they got were absolutely unacceptable. If you dislike a game, if you're disappointed in a game, then please give constructive feedback. That's the way that we should be talking to developers. That's the way that we'll get real change. You know, death threats and it's just not, it's not the right way to go about it. So, you know, I don't condone the actions of anybody there, and I think that's quite a disgusting way to sort of respond to it. So Murray was kind of talking about a little bit of sort of how they responded to No Man's Sky and the debacle, and I think it's really telling of the development team, because it is a small team. I think there's like a dozen people that worked on the game, and they, you know, they could have just turned around and said, right, you know, we learned from this experience, and we're going to put No Man's Sky behind, and we're going to bury it, we're going to ignore it, and we're just going to go dark and not say anything about it again. But instead, Hello Games chose to knuckle down and to address the issues that people had, and a lot of those issues have definitely been addressed in the most recent update, and I think that's really telling for the studio and for the, you know, for Sean Murray's leadership. And he says it here perfectly. You know, we did something that I think I've always done when I look back at my life. When I've dealt with shitty situations when I was a kid, moving between lots of schools, or when I've had shitty bosses later in life, I basically just get my head down and I work and I avoid. I just focus on making games, making cool, creative things. And that's an outlet for me. I think the team just wanted to do that. And I think, you know, we have to commend Hello Games for their decision to knuckle down and how hard they've clearly worked over the last 2 games to improve the game that they had, to make it a game that delivers on those promises that they made back in 2016. And absolutely, I think they should get credit for that. And I think, you know, they should be commended just for their sheer strength of character and the steel that they've shown in responding to all the death threats that they've had and all the attacks and everything. And rather than just sort of saying, oh, sorry, we made a mistake, and sort of running away, they've kind of rewrote the story for themselves, and I think that's really, really commendable. So what can we learn from No Man's Sky? Well, there's a few things, good and bad. I think the content is definitely better. I think it's more interesting. What worries me is it does kind of like create a precedent for games going ahead, in that even if a game comes out, you know, in a very unfinished state and it gets a lot of criticism, that, you know, you can keep updating the game and until you get to the finished product that you'd already always aimed for. So developers now, because of updates and everything, can release games when they're not finished, and I think that's really wrong. I think you know, if you look 10 years ago, when you didn't have, you know, DLC and downloadable content and daily updates and patches, you had to create a finished product. So, you know, whether that game took you 5 years to make, and you had to spend the time doing that so that the game was polished, it was finished, and it came out in the way that you intended for it to be. Now developers, because of, you know, downloadable content, they don't need to do that, and I think that's really worrying, and I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for the industry, because it's almost encouraging developers to sort of put out games, you know, in vanilla states, and then just add content in later as they get responses and feedback from players. And you know, it's a lot of content that's been added in No Man's Sky. I mean, Sean Murray says in his article that they'd always designed for it to be the way it was when it came out, but clearly I don't think that is the case at all. Why is this content free? Well, of course, even though there was a lot of, you know, really poor reviews and terrible reactions, and it was a PR nightmare, No Man's Sky still sold in millions of units. I think it sold like over 3.5 million units, simply because of all the hype and misdirection that was created in marketing. And that meant that it made a ton of money back in 2016, which for a small studio like Hello Games has given them the money and the funding to produce all of this free content. So if you can hype up your game, lie to consumers and misdirect and sell the game for tons of money when it's a poor product, then, you know, you've made that money, and you can come back and fix those problems later. Like, I'm not necessarily sure this is giving a good moral story or a good kind of lesson to developers. So in some ways, I've got to give, you know, credit to Hello Games for not giving up, but in other ways, I don't know what it says about the industry, to be honest, and the fact that a game can bomb so bad as No Man's Sky did in 2016, but then kind of redeem itself 2 years later. I think it's an incredible story. And I will be super interested to hear what you guys think of it in the comment section below. So please let me know what you guys think of this new update from Hello Games to No Man's Sky. What do you think? Do you think the game is now worth revisiting? What are your whole thoughts on the way Hello Games have, you know, faced this challenge, and what are your general thoughts on releasing games in an unfinished state and misdirection, hype, all of the above? Let me know in the comment section below. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please of course hit the like button as always to show your support. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and hit the bell button so you never miss any future content. Anyway, hope you guys have a great week. Take care, and as always, happy gaming. Bye guys.